So I want to welcome you all today to episode 2 of our invasive series webinar. And today we are going to have Wilma Holly joining us to talk about invasive plants near you and part 2 of a 2-part series on the invasive plants near you. Wilma.
Okay, whoops. A little bit about myself. I am from New York originally. I grew up on a dairy farm there, and I have loved the outdoors and protecting the environment, I guess, since a very early age. I've been teaching Florida-friendly landscaping for over 15 years now. It's probably 16 or 17 years. I started out in Pinellas County in Florida way back, I guess, in 2004. Taught there for several years and then moved down here. And before that, I worked environmental education in an elementary school. So been around for a while doing the same kinds of stuff, and I love it.
And I'm Dr. Katherine Clements. I'm the Ecology and Natural Resources Educator for University of Florida IFAS Extension in Sarasota County. I also grew up in New York, a little bit further away from where Wilma grew up. I'm from Buffalo, New York, and I spent a lot of my early years and my early career out in nature and doing environmental education. I then transitioned to Florida and decided to become a physician. So I was a physician for about 15 or so years. And then in 2017, returned to environmental education at the position I now have with University of Florida IFAS. I also have lived in a state park here locally in Sarasota County for a little over 20 years. We've brought up 2 children here and lots of animals. And I also love what I do, and I'm super passionate about making a difference in our world through educating about our natural environment.
Oops.
So if you are not familiar with Extension, we just wanted to share a little bit about Extension. It is a partnership between the county that we're in our case, Sarasota County, because all counties in the state of Florida have an Extension office associated with them. So Extension is a partnership between that county, the University of Florida, and the USDA, or US Department of Agriculture. And our mission is really to use the university research and resources to address the local needs of our community through initiatives, classes, outreach, and volunteer opportunities. So we're really an educational facility. Next.
Oops, there we go.
There we go. So these are just some of the areas of education and programming that we offer. Wilma is very specific to Florida-friendly landscaping, and she's going to talk a little bit more about that further in the presentation today. And there in bold also is the Ecology and Natural Resources program, which is the program that I'm aligned with. But you can see we have all sorts of different programs and specialty areas and ways that we can help our community with their local needs. Next.
Trying. Giving me a hard time today.
Yes, our slides are moving slowly today. These are just some of the logos of the programs that we have through our office. So you may be familiar with some of these. You may even be a master gardener or a master naturalist or participate in Lake Watch or our Green Business Partnership. So we welcome all of you, especially our volunteers and participants in our programs. Next. So today, this is our agenda for our couple of hours together. We are going to talk about definitions of invasive species, the impacts that invasive species have, and then I'll turn it over to Wilma, and she's going to talk about specific plants near you that are either invasive or have a risk of becoming invasive. And then, of course, we always like to end with what you can do to be a part of the solution. Next. So definitions. In June 2020, a number of University of Florida professors and extension agents put together and published this invasive species terminology paper to try to sort of coordinate across all agencies a common language about invasive species. It was just found that a lot of different people and agencies were using different terms, and it was starting to become confusing when this is such a large issue that now really has a spotlight on it. So native, when we use the word native, we're referring to a species that occurs naturally in a specified geographic area. And usually for Florida, natives mean having been here since basically Bartram, who was a botanist, came here and took notes and sketches. And if plants were here a couple hundred years ago and are found in his literature, then they are considered native. A non-native is a species that does not occur naturally in a specified geographic area. So it hasn't been here for hundreds of years, and it was introduced, which is our next definition. Introduced is a species brought to a new geographic area, either intentionally or unintentionally by humans. So therefore it would be introduced and non-native in the new area. And established is a species having a self-sustaining and reproducing population in a specified area without the need for human intervention, which just means it's able to establish itself and reproduce on its own without our help. And this can apply to both native and non-native species. Next. So when we're talking about invasives, there are basically three things that really identify a plant as invasive. Otherwise, it might just be non-native and not go all the way into falling into the category of invasive. So invasive is a species that is non-native. So that has to be part of it. It is a non-native species. It was introduced by humans, either intentionally or unintentionally, and it is causing environmental or economic harm or harm to human health. So all three of those conditions have to be met to be considered invasive as a species. Now, there are some native species that some people might be thinking are a problem, but we shouldn't call those invasive because they are native. So native species that might be a little aggressive or might overgrow, like grapevine, we would refer to those as a nuisance species. So it's an individual or group of individuals of a species that cause management issue or property damage, present a threat to public safety, or is an annoyance. And then range change, this is just a term that refers to a species' current or existing range growing, shrinking, or shifting over time. And this usually doesn't refer to an invasive species, although it can. But I usually think of coyotes and armadillos as an example. So coyotes and armadillos were not native to Florida originally, but because of changes either in the environment or their main predator not being around anymore, they were able to move into Florida without the assistance of humans. Okay, next. So we have a few quotes in here. The National Park Service says, European settlers brought hundreds of plants to North America. Introductions continue today and are increasing due to an exploding human population. Many introduced plants have become naturalized across the continent, and some are replacing North American native plant species. So that's sort of what happens. And a non-native plant that does not need human help to reproduce and maintain itself over time in an area where it is not native, this is what's considered naturalized. So it's set up that population that is reproducing on its own. So even though their offspring reproduce and spread naturally without human help, naturalized plants do not, over time, become native members of the local plant community. So even though you may see them growing everywhere and they are reproducing on their own, and maybe they've been around for your lifetime, if they have not been around in Florida for hundreds of years, they are not native, and they are not providing the habitat and the necessary ecosystem functions that our native plants do usually. So these are some of the other terms that have been used that we're trying to move away from, just because it gets really confusing, and also some of these terms are not really culturally appropriate to be utilizing. So these all sort of refer to the same thing, but we are trying to clarify the terminology and just use the word invasive if that is the case, or non-native if a plant does not belong here, but it hasn't actually caused issues with the ecosystem. Next. Another definition, this is actually a legal definition. Noxious weed is any plant or plant product that can directly or indirectly injure or cause damage to crops, livestock, poultry, or other interests of agriculture, irrigation, navigation, the natural resources of the United States, the public health, or the environment. So there are noxious weed lists for both Florida and federal lists as well. And those are plants that have actually caused such a problem that there is statutes regarding their transport. So it will be illegal to plant these, illegal to transport them, for instance. Next. And just to remind you, as we said, invasive species are going to be non-native. They will have been introduced by humans, and they will be causing some sort of environmental, economic, or harm to human health. And we're starting to characterize this issue with this term of biological pollution, because I think that really sort of gets to the core of why invasive species are an issue. Sometimes I have people ask me, well, why can't we just let all the plants grow in whatever way they want to? And it's because some of these non-native plants are capable of hybridizing with native plant relatives, resulting in unnatural changes to a plant's genetic makeup. Still others contain toxins that may be lethal to certain animals. These invasive organisms have been referred to as biological pollution. And in some cases, these plant invaders are driving our rarest species closer to extinction. Next. So let's talk about the impacts they have. The National Park Service says invasive non-native organisms are one of the greatest threats to the natural ecosystems of the US and are destroying America's natural history and identity. These unwelcome plants, insects, and other organisms are disrupting the ecology of natural ecosystems, displacing native plant and animal species, and degrading our nation's unique and diverse biological resources. Next. So why is Florida such a welcome home to some of these invasive species? So there are over 4,900 identified plant species in Florida, and 1,500 of those are considered non-native. So that's about a third of the plants identified in Florida are actually considered non-native. Invasive plants, so remember that sort of non-native taken to another level of actually causing ecological or economic harm. So invasive plants represent only 4% of that total number, but they comprise 33% of the total plant biomass growing in Florida. So this gets to one of those issues, is even though only 4% of the almost 5,000 identified plants are actually considered invasive here, they grow in these monocultures often. They overgrow and outcompete our native plants, and they represent a third of all of the plant biomass in our state. And there's also a lot of non-native fish and wildlife, insects, mites, nematodes, fungi, microbes, and we're going to talk about those in future episodes in the series. Next. So we also have a lot of ports in our state, and 85% of non-native plants in the US actually come through the Port of Miami. We think that about 25,000 plants are introduced every year, either purposely or inadvertently. And the aquarium, landscape, nursery, and florist trade are often some of the routes of introduction. But also things are introduced unintentionally. They can be carried in the ballast waters of ships that are coming from other countries and continents. They can be transported by machinery, cars, or boats, like you see here with this invasive, I believe that's hydrilla, wrapped all around the boat motor. So now if somebody drives that boat somewhere else and puts it in a different body of water, they've now transported an invasive plant that is probably going to start growing somewhere else. Sometimes travelers bring back souvenir plants. And then in terms of animals, the exotic animal trade is definitely a source of introduction of invasive animals. Next. So we also have an amazing tropical and subtropical climate here in Florida. So we have long growing seasons. It makes it very easy for many of these plants, especially plants from similar climates, to take hold. We also have vast agricultural holdings, and some of our invasive plants and grasses really like to live in those agricultural areas. We have out-of-state and seasonal landowners who may not understand the invasive species problem or may not be around to sort of manage their land. We also, as we continue to move more than 1,000 people a day into Florida, and we continue to develop residential and commercial areas, we have a greater what's called urban wildland interface. And that's where residential and commercial areas abut more natural areas. And often in that disturbance zone between those two is where the invasive plants really like to live. Next. So invasives can spread very rapidly. It's part of their strategy that allow them to become invasive. They have fast growth. They often have rapid reproductive cycles, meaning they might have, for instance, with a plant, they might produce seeds multiple times a year, or high fecundity. So often when they do produce seeds, they produce a lot of seeds. They often have behavioral plasticity, meaning they can tolerate a wide range of conditions. And they often lack either their native predators or insects or diseases that would sort of keep their population at bay in their native homeland. Next. So part of the danger of the invasive species is they do outcompete our native species for, it could be they're outcompeting for sunlight or water or nutrients. They may actually push threatened species to extinction. Some of the plants actually increase wildfire risk and increase fire fuel. They can burn hotter because of some of the oily resinous constituents in them. Some of the non-natives, like Australian pine, are actually unstable in our tropical wind events, and they can be very difficult and expensive to control. Here's some of the expenses. In fiscal year 2010 to 2011, Florida spent about $23 million fighting just invasive plants. That's not even invasive animals, just invasive plants. Annual cost to the US economy is estimated at $120 billion a year. And over 100 million acres, which is roughly the size of California, is considered to be suffering from invasive plant infestations in our country. Invasive species have contributed directly to the decline of 42% of the threatened and endangered species in the United States. So there's a cost at the biodiversity level as well. Next. So this is a graphical representation that can just help explain how invasive species spread and multiply, as well as the cost of management. So down there in the lower left-hand corner in that orange area where it says prevention, this is where the species has not occurred in an area yet, and we do something called EDRR, which is early detection, rapid response. We're watching out for species that could have an invasion risk. We're trying to prevent them from either getting into an area, or if they do get in, we try to respond rapidly to that and be in that eradication phase, which is next. So prevention and eradication is definitely much cheaper, requires less time, less resources for management than if the plant is allowed to enter into an area and expand its range and population. Then we're into the containment stage, where we are just trying to manage the species and contain it to a given geographic area. This costs, time, money, and resources. And if we are not successful with that, we then progress into the asset-based protection, where the plant has expanded its range and population to a large area, and it's taking a lot of time, effort, and money just to make sure that we're saving our natural ecosystems. And that's sort of where we are with the Burmese python, for instance, is it's having a dramatic impact on the ecosystem of the Everglades, and we're just trying our best to manage its population so there aren't further detrimental effects. We're never going to contain or eradicate those Burmese pythons at this point. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Wilma to talk about plants.
Okay. I forgot to say when I introduced myself that I was Florida Friendly Landscaping Program Specialist, and just about everything I do has one way or another is connected to this program, which has these 9 principles. And when you're talking about invasive species, the 3 that are highlighted here are probably the most important, but all these are very much interrelated. But the right plant, the right place, of course, would not even have an invasive species in there. And obviously you would want to get rid of those, but watering and fertilizing and mulching can help prevent some of those problems. But attracting wildlife, because if you don't have invasive species, then you're going to attract the kind of wildlife you need, because a lot of times the invasive species will prohibit wildlife in an area or interfere with wildlife. And then managing yard pests responsibly is especially important with invasive species, because invasive species are yard pests in a lot of situations. So even weeds are pests, considered pests. So we need to consider that. These others are related to it as well. And I like to show this side because a good share of us aren't from Florida originally. Sometimes in a class of 100, we've had maybe 2 people in the whole class that were originally they're Florida natives, but most people aren't. So they come here and they think it's going to be kind of like this. You're going to have a lot of time to relax and sit out, you know, in your hammock, maybe sip a beverage or whatever. And then they start working in the yard and they feel like it's more like this. But if you do implement the Florida friendly practices and you identify the weeds and, you know, take care of them properly, you can, you know, and control them before they become a problem, then you're going to have a lot more time to relax other than out there fighting them all the time. So it's all very important. So now into the plants. I'm covering 30 plants today, so I'm not giving a whole lot of information on each one. I just wanted to make you aware of some of the ones that are on the caution list or on the high invasion risk. Because there's some of these up and coming, they may never end up being invasive, but if they're on the caution list or on the high invasion risk category, and we'll explain later what those terms mean, but there's something we need to be aware of. If we're going to have those in our yard, we want to be aware of the problems that they can cause and not allow them to spread to natural areas. So that's why we're mentioning some of these today. So the first one is green shrimp plant. It's related to Mexican petunia, the Ruellia blecum. And it's native to temperate and tropical Asia and the Pacific. Its earliest record is 1941. It is a ground cover. And in Florida, at least in South Florida, it's a host plant for the malachite butterfly. So a lot of people want to raise it for that purpose, but there are other native plants that are also host plants, and we should try to plant those instead. Especially in South Florida, it's going to grow like crazy. And I know when I get it in my yard, it's very, very difficult to pull out because it roots down at the nodes, and not just lightly where it's easy to pull. You actually have to get a tool and dig it out, or it just breaks off and then it's going to spread from there. So control would require spray or, you know, really getting in there and digging after it. And you can see this is a potted plant that it grew in, and it's just growing and growing and growing and coming down the sides. And then, you know, there's going to be seeds after it blooms in here. You can see where the bloom is there, and then there's going to be seeds forming, and then they're going to spread, and then they're going to grow. I've had big patches of it in my yard that I've had to dig out. Twin leaf nightshade. This is one I see a lot on site visits. People, it started growing in people's yards, and they let it grow, and they go, "What is this? Do you know?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I do know." At first I didn't, but it was one I learned really fast. Because I see it so much, and we also get it brought into the office a lot. And I also got an email yesterday with a picture of it. Like, what is this? So it's around our area in Central Florida anyways. And it is on the caution list for the whole state. It's a FLEPC category 2, and FLEPC is the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council. We use the Uf Ifas Assessment, University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences assessment, because we're part of the University of Florida and it's a science-based assessment. But is important too. If it's on either one of those lists, I think people need to be aware of both of them and try not to plant any of those plants on either one of those lists. This originated in Central America and Mexico. Earliest record was 1943, and it is the nightshade family. It is poisonous to people, but not toxic, because there are some people that eat it. I don't think I would try anything in the, well, I wouldn't say anything in the Scillium family, because I do eat tomatoes and I do eat potatoes, I do eat eggplants, but you just need to be aware of the facts. And if you're going to eat it, make sure you look up a lot of information and find out how it's safe and things like that. Controlling it, it does pull out fairly easily. Pull your seedlings and the whole plant if possible. Sometimes if the plant gets kind of large, they do get 4 to 6 feet, then you might have to cut it and then spray the stump. It gets 5 to 20 flowers in one bunch on the opposite side of the leaves, and each one of those can develop into a fruit. And remember, the fruit, when it gets ripe, is this bright yellow. And then there's going to be several seeds at each one of those fruits. So you can see why in a disturbed area, it's just going to take off and explode in an area. And I've seen it in people's yards, in their landscape bed, in a situation like that, where it gets pretty full like that. Chinese violet, Ganges primrose, Azostasia gangetica. This one, it's still in the nursery trade. I had it in my yard a few years ago. I didn't realize it was on the list. And it's hard to get rid of once you've had it. It spreads the seeds pretty rapidly. It's on the caution list, and it's also on category 2 for FLEPC. It's from Africa and tropical Asia, and the earliest record is 1935. I hadn't even heard about it up until maybe 8 or 9 years ago. It does spread from cultivation in roadsides and disturbed areas, and it's got simple opposite entire leaves. And it actually will grow up several feet through another plant. It generally stays maybe 2 to 3 feet, but I've seen it reach for the light inside of another plant up to 6 feet. So it grows. And the thing about it, when the seed pods open, they kind of open, really, they explode and spread seeds far from the plant. And that's why I'm having trouble getting it out of my yard, because it's inside of other plants where it burst open and then the seeds drop down next to a plant, but also I'll find it a ways away. So I'm constantly having to re-pull from getting rid of the original plant several years ago. Praxilis, I think this is the only one on my list that I have today that is actually on the invasive species list. And I did include this because up until last summer, this is another one I never heard of. It's on FLEPC category 2, and a lot of times it's mistaken for ageratum or blue mist flower, which is Conoclinum colestinium. And it looks a lot like that. And my worry is that I might have accidentally told somebody that they had blue mist flower, and it wasn't, except for it's not been found in Sarasota County yet. And the reason I included it here, because they're considering adding it to the federal noxious weed list. plant protection and quarantine people. So that means it's pretty bad if they're considering adding it to that list. And I'm surprised I hadn't ever heard of it, but I'm worried that I might have accidentally told somebody it was a good plant, a native plant, because it looks so much like it. I'm going to show you a picture of how to tell the difference. It's from South America, and the seeds spread by the wind and water and by attaching to fur and feathers and clothing and machinery. So that's a lot of ways that it can spread. And you can see from this map here, this is where it is. It's not in Sarasota County here, but it's in Manatee County and the county next to Manatee County and Hillsborough and Pasco and on up north. So it's very soon likely to be in our county and southern counties and more northern counties. So it's one you want to watch out for. And how to tell the difference. The Praxilis, the leaves are a little bit narrower. The serrations are more pointed. In the blue ageratum, the blue mist flower, it's the serration is more rounded and the leaves are a little bit wider. Those are the main differences that I noticed. There's probably other differences that I don't know, but there is a IEDIS, Electronic Data Information Source document, right, ENH 1321, that talks a lot more about this, and that's where these pictures are from, because obviously I have not seen it yet, but it's important that we're aware of new and upcoming stuff, and this one being so so prevalent in the counties that it's in, I figured we should include it here. And then this one is kind of a sad one for me. My neighbor has a huge row of these, although he keeps it trimmed pretty much, so there's probably not that much seeds because he's trimming it. It's about a 12-foot hedge that he keeps it around his swimming pool and around the back side of his house, which separates our two properties. And this is on the high invasion risk by the Uf Ifas Assessment in Flepsy Category 2. Its origin is Australasia and its earliest record is 1966. It's in the Myrtaceae family, which there's a lot of plants in that family. And you can just see, imagine this is a tree, the amount of seeds that could develop from this. And they just recently changed the name to Melaleuca Biminellis. And if you know Melaleuca, you know, the Everglades is covered with the punk tree, which, and you know, they make mulch out of it and all. It's related to that plant. I've known forever that it was related to that plant, but they just recently, well, probably in the last year or two, have changed this to that family. And this is a tree locally in Sarasota County. And you can just, I mean, there's just millions of seeds that are going to be produced by that tree. And you can see a close-up why it gets called bottle brush. It looks like a bottle brush. Anyway, so a really, really high-risk plant there. Staghorn Fern, another one that kind of surprised me when they added it to the list. It's on the caution list in Flepsy Category 2. Again, from Australasia, earliest record 2002. This is one that surprised me. I'm not sure what the earliest record means. Is that the earliest time they found it in a natural area, the first time they saw it spreading or what? Because I know the plant's been around longer than that. But anyways, it's becoming a problem in natural areas. I have seen it spread. I've seen it starting on little palm trees. I've seen little tiny plants like that starting when I go out and do site visits. Somebody had one in their yard or their neighbor had one and it's starting to grow on the side of their trees and things like that. So it is becoming more of a problem over time. This is one that's going to upset a lot of people. Rainbow eucalyptus, Eucalyptus deglupta. Actually, there's about 6 or 7 eucalyptus on the invasive high invasion risk category, not invasive, but high invasion risk. Even the silver dollar eucalyptus is on that list, but I know this tree is beautiful and I always wanted one. Then I realized it's on this list. I can't ever have one, but it's from Australasia, earliest record 1994. Just a beautiful tree, but like most of the eucalyptus, it has a really risk of becoming very invasive. And this one, this is the fruit that everybody eats, passion fruit, the purple Grenadilla, Passiflora edulis. Again, high invasion risk. It's not listed on FLEPC. It's from South America. The earliest record is 1956. And there are a lot of passion vines. Not all of them are edible, but there are some native ones. So those are the ones you want to plant. If you're planting the, don't want to let any of the fruit escape, you know, pick them off before something eats them and carries them off. This is another one. I think when these edible plants get on these lists, it's like kind of sad. And one plant that I'm not talking about today, so I'll just mention it with this because it's another edible plant, is mango is on the caution list for both South Florida and Central Florida, but not North Florida. Probably freezes in North Florida. But again, these edible plants, if you're going to grow them, try to get them before they're carried off. I know squirrels love mangoes and they carry them all over the place. So that's probably why mangoes got added to the list. And I'm sure there's animals that eat figs and carry them off too. So it's not listed on the FLEPC list, and it comes from Africa and temperate and tropical Asia and Europe. And its earliest record is 1961. So another edible plant that's been added to the list. And this is the other fig. Well, there's more than this one. There's a couple others also on the list, but this creeping fig is used as a ground cover a lot. It's also used on walls. It's planted quite a bit. Been added to the high invasion risk, so it's one that we need to be aware of and, you know, plant a native ground cover, something like that. Try a native vine that crawls up your wall rather than this. It's not listed on FLEPC. And its origin is temperate and tropical Asia, earliest record 1927. And these, when they're young, these leaves are small like this. As they get older, they do get quite a bit larger. I've seen them way up high on walls and buildings, and they get quite large. Not as big as some plants, but you know, you'll see them a few inches across. And this is another edible, a really good plant for third world countries because the seeds purify water. It's got a huge protein value and a lot of really good properties as far as edibility and things like that and nutrition, but it is a high invasion risk. It's not listed on FLEPC yet, and its origin is tropical Asia. Earliest record wasn't stated, but there is a herbarium specimen from 1894. So it's been around for quite a while. That was a plant that I had planted. Well, I hadn't planted, I had it in a pot. And then when I found out it was on the list, I got rid of it. So some of these plants that they're on the high invasion risk, I've had them in my yard, not knowing, or they weren't on the list yet, but then they've been added in the last few years. So I'm gradually having to get rid of all those plants that I didn't know about before. This English ivy, another one that was recently added within the last couple of years. I never knew it got this bad, but look at all these trees, how it just climbed up all the leaves, and that means it's all over the ground too. But once it climbs up those trees, it doesn't even really need to be connected to the ground because it's going to attach to the trees and it's going to get what it needs from rain and the bark. It's not a epiphyte, but it doesn't need a lot of water. It would survive just on rainfall. Origin is Africa, temperate Asia, and Europe. Earliest record 1973. It's on the high invasion risk. So just one that we need to be aware of in our yards. I actually have one in my yard still, but since I found it was on this list, I keep it in an area about 2 foot by 3 foot. And when it starts growing, I just trim it back. I will eventually get rid of it, but I haven't yet. Bush Alamanda, this one was probably in the last couple of years, because when we found out that this other brown bud Alamanda was on this list, then we started, people wanted a small bush. Bush Alamanda, we started recommending that, and then they just added that to the high invasion risk. So now there's not an Alamanda to recommend. It's from South America, its earliest record, 2002. A pretty little plant, but with its high invasion risk, not recommended to plant it. Split leaf philodendron, the Monstera deliciosa, again on the high invasion risk, not listed yet. Its origin is Central America, North Mexico, South America, and its earliest record is 1967. This picture right here was last weekend at Lowe's. So, and that's a problem with people say, well, why are the box stores and other stores allowed to sell these? Because they're not prohibited. If it was prohibited, they wouldn't sell them, but just being on the invasive species list or a caution list or a high invasion risk, they still do sell them, unfortunately. It's up to us to learn these plants and not plant them ourselves. And this was in someone's yard. Large these leaves are. This was a variegated Monstera deliciosa. This person's about the same size as me, and I think that if she could get behind the leaf entirely, she would completely be hidden. That is a huge, huge leaf. The fruit's edible, but it has to be fully ripe, and then it starts peeling away from the stem. And I'll show you what those look like. Once these start pulling away, then you can eat them, and apparently it's super, super sweet. If you eat them before they're fully ripe, that's got oxalates in it, and it will really cause pain in your mouth. And you can see as the leaves get older, they do get more and more holes in them and more separation in between the veins and all. Okay, there's a message here. If you have a plant that has been in your yard that is not growing in an invasive manner, then why would you need to remove it? If we think of right plant, right place, isn't it possible that someone invasive, you can get rid of it, or you can keep one and not grow it in an invasive manner. But as far as I'm concerned, being the Florida Friendly Landscape Specialist, I don't want to have invasive plants. And that's why I haven't got rid of it yet, though, because it's not in an invasive manner and it's not going to escape my yard because it's in the middle of the yard. But it's just something to be aware of, and mainly to not plant something after you know about it. That's probably the biggest reason for like me saying I'm going to get rid of it, because I don't want to have plants that are high invasion risk. But yeah, if you're not growing in an invasive manner, I mean, I'm not probably ever going to get rid of my mango trees, but I will be more aware of seed spreading or squirrels carrying them, try to pick the fruit before anything can get it, something like that. But mainly it's just to make people aware and not plant plants that may become invasive or that are high invasion risk. There's so many native plants, so many beautiful plants that we can plant that it's best not to have these plants.
And Wilma, can I also just add that a lot of times we get questions about why these things are being sold, and they're being sold because there's a demand for them. So if we learn some of these that either are a problem or could become a problem, and we choose native plants over those, then there will be less demand and less likelihood that they're going to be bought and planted somewhere where they can become invasive. So just things to think about on both sides of it.
Right. Thank you. So Canna Indian shot, Canna indica. This one's on the high invasion risk. It's not listed by FLEPSI yet. From Central America, Mexico, and South America. It spreads by rhizomes under the ground, but also spreads by seeds. And there's quite a few seeds. One seed, you can see a couple of seed pods, I think, right in there. Fairly large, and there's quite a few seeds in one pod, so you can see where they can spread pretty fast. Even the native one spreads pretty rapidly. We have a bioswale out here by the building, and the area where that is has really, really taken the native one. So the non-native one is especially one that you do want to get rid of on that one. Ponytail grass. This one is embarrassing to me because about 5 months ago, I had never even heard of it. And I saw some at a nursery and I didn't look it up. I just bought it for work for our office. And then we have a gentleman that is creating a plant list, a record of every single plant we put in here. And he emailed me and he said, should I not add this to the list since it's invasive? And I said, what do you mean it's invasive? And it's listed under Mexican feathergrass on the IFAS assessment, but it is truly invasive and we are getting rid of it, but we are, and it's a huge spreader. It gets all kinds of seeds on it and it can spread rapidly. It's not listed on FLEPSI yet. It's from North America, Mexico, and South America. It's a really huge threat in Australia. I mean, major threat in Australia. And it's not stated what the earliest record in the United States is or in Florida. But yeah, we planted 7 of them. Me and another person bought them with our own personal money. And every other plant we put in this planting was native, but these were so cute. Who knew they were invasive? So it's easy to make a mistake. And that's just like, okay, look up every plant you buy. Don't just take it for granted because a nursery has it. I thought it was a new introduction. I had no idea that it was an invasive plant. So learned my lesson there. Liriopes spicata. High invasion risk, not listed on FLEPSI list, and there are a lot of Liriopes, or Lirio, some people pronounce it. Origin is temperate and tropical Asia, earliest record 1982. This has been used as a ground cover, a border plant forever and ever and ever. There's also one called the evergreen giant, which is not on the high invasion risk, but just another one to be aware of. I have the black one. I think it's called Black Magic or something like that. Beautiful, but I noticed that it's spreading out in a pretty big area. So I'm gonna have to watch that one really carefully. And that's just a picture of it in a large area. Cape honeysuckle. This is another one that really pains me because I plant a lot of plants for butterflies and hummingbirds. And this one was added to the list after I had mine in. So I'm watching it very carefully. Again, it's just one of those that it gets a lot of seeds on it and you don't want that spreading into other areas. So I'm gonna have to remove that eventually. Earliest record 1931. And it even comes in this neon orange color. It kind of is a sprawling, but it sends runners underground and above ground. So it gets to be a huge plant relatively easy. You can see the leaves are compound. Just one to watch out for. Yellow elder, which is in the same family. This is interesting. Tacoma Capensis used to be called Tecumseh up until a few years ago, and then it was changed to Tacoma. And it's in the same family as this, Tacoma stans, which several years ago, this was on the FNGLA, which is the Florida Nurseryman Growers and Landscape Association. It was on their Plant of the Year list. And just in the last couple of years, it's been added to the high invasion risk category because it gets numerous seeds. I mean, seeds and more seeds. It gets tons of seed pods on it. I think I have a picture here with that. It can be a large shrub or a small tree, depending on how it's pruned. It didn't list the earliest record, but in the Keys, they had it there in the late 1800s. And originally it was listed as a native plant by some botanists, not all botanists. But then it just, I guess by DNA records in testing and all that, they have decided that it wasn't invasive or it wasn't native now, and now it's invasive. You can see the seed pods, and when those get ripe and you open them up, there's just layer after layer after layer of seeds in there. And it's been planted like crazy because it's a popular pollinator plant. Even though I don't see tons and tons of pollinators on it, I do see a few, and they must get pollinated because the seeds in it, it may be moths at night that pollinate it, but has compound serrated leaves, more serration than the Cape honeysuckle. And just like I said, it produces seeds like crazy. Brazilian joyweed, Alternantheria Brasiliana, Amaranth ACE. There's a lot of plants in the Amaranthus family that have become invasive, not all of them, because there's tons and tons of plants in that family. But this one's on the high invasion risk. It's from North America, Mexico, and then South America. And its earliest record is 1994. So it's a relatively new introduction. And because of its dark leaves, people have planted it as a contrast against variegated plants. And I mean, just really, really used a lot. Up until a couple of years ago, we even had sold it in our Master Gardener plant sale because it wasn't on this list yet. So now we're not selling anything on the high invasion risk, but the damage is done on some of those. And it does produce a lot of flowers late in the season. And this is another one that will grow 6 or 7 or 8 feet up through another plant. But each one of these little pom-poms only produces 1 seed. So that's good, but look how many there are on each plant. So it does produce a lot. Pretty plant, but not good. And then this basket plant, inch plant, there's another plant. There's a plant called black basket grass, not the same thing. That's a very flat, kind of ridgy leaf and grows real close to the ground. And this one used to be called Spironema, which is the name that I remembered it by. It's been added to the caution list, and it's on Flepsy category 2. And this is the one of the ones that we saw a lot of at one of the parks that we went to recently. I forgot the name of that park, Catherine.
Pinecraft?
Pinecraft Park, yeah. And for some reason, I didn't take any pictures, so I just found some of these that I had from previous locations. But it spreads by runners, and it just reproduces and reproduces and reproduces. The runners get runners and, you know, little plantlets at the end, and then those send out 2 or 3 runners. So it can cover a huge area in a short amount of time. And it also does get some seeds when it blooms. These were mostly already through blooming, but the flower spike was still there. And it survives drought. These probably have not had water in months, and they're still growing. They shrivel up a little bit, and in the full sun, they get a lot of red and tinge on them. But in the shade and where they get a little bit of water, they just grow and they just keep producing. And then it has a folklore reputation as an antiviral and antimicrobial. There's a lot of these plants that do have uses that way, but there's also native plants that have a lot of the same uses that we would be better off using rather than planting an invasive plant. Candlestick plant is another one of the ones actually used for ringworm because of fungicidal properties, but it's been added to the caution list, and it's not listed under Flepsy, from South America, and its earliest record is 1964, and the seeds remain viable for a long time. We had it here at Twin Lakes Park in our extension office in Sarasota County several years ago, and then somebody said it's on the Flepsy list or on the Uf Ifas Assessment list, and it wasn't at the time. I said, but, and then eventually they added it. Anyway, we got rid of every single plant that was here because it was spreading all over the place. And for 2 years, there wasn't a single plant here. And now some of those seeds came back and started growing again. So we still got the same problem where we have to remove them again. So but you can see it's quite pretty, and why it got the name candlestick plant, because of the flowers. But look at the seed pods. There is 50 to 60 seeds in each one of these seed pods. And look how many, this is just one end here. There's one end there, there's one there. There's dozens of those on each plant, and the whole plant just sprawls all over the place. And it can get 10 to 12 feet. So you can imagine sprawling in every which direction, how many seeds are going to be on each plant. And that's why they came back. Just a really bad plant. Okay, queen palm. This is another one, unfortunately, I have in my yard. I couldn't get anybody to come and cut him down, and I couldn't do it myself, and I wished I had somehow chopped at him or done something to him. I still think I might have somebody come and cut the tops out of him. It's on the caution list for the Uf Ifas Assessment Category 2 for the Flepsy list. Its origin is South America. Its earliest record is 1959, but you just see all these seeds. And there's 1, 2, 3 branches with seed pods on them. And it gets several inflorescences at a time. So, and they all seem to stay pretty close to the plant when they fall, but some do get carried away by some animals. And you can there's a lot. When they turn yellow when they get ripe and they fall off, they ferment on the ground underneath the plant. They are really super good for pollinators when they're in flower, but they should be cut off right after that before they're allowed to reproduce. Wax begonia, this is another, I think, fairly new addition. I didn't know it up until a couple of years ago was on the list. Uf Ifas Assessment is on the caution list. Flepsy Category 2 from South America, earliest record 1910. This has been used as a bedding plant for ever since I can remember. I remember growing up and having it in New York, planting it. I don't know if it's invasive up there. Here where things don't freeze, they're much more apt to be, just grow beyond control. It seeds down, it grows. A piece of this plant can break off and land somewhere else, and it can start growing, root in and grow. So it can be a problem. It used to be called Begonia semperflorens. That's why for a long time I didn't think wax begonia, but then I realized that it's just got a new name, cucullata, as plants get changed quite frequently. Anyways, Bermuda grass, this is actually used as a grass. In some areas, I think, yeah, I'm not going to say where because I'm not sure where, but Uf Ifas Assessment list is on the caution list. Flepsy, it's not listed yet. It's not actually, the origin is not actually known. Earliest record, 1896. So this plant's been around for a long, long time. I have this growing in my yard. I have to keep getting rid of areas where I haven't gotten rid of it yet. Not in a lot of areas because I've gotten rid of a large share of it, but I do have to keep after it to keep it from spreading more. Suriname cherry, Eugenia Uniflora. This one's been on the list for a long, long time. It's invasive in South Florida, Central and North Florida. It's on the caution list. It is a plant that's used for fruit by a lot of people, kind of sour for me. I don't like a lot of plants that a lot of other people like because I don't like sour. And it may not be sour to other people. Different people have different tastes, but there's actually a black form of it. And that one is sweeter to me, but still invasive. Category 1 on the Flepsy list. So that's pretty invasive when they start adding it to their Category 1 and invasive in South Florida too. So a lot of chance of really spreading it. Earliest record is 1893. And then this one was a huge surprise to me. I don't think until yesterday I knew that this one was on the list. I was putting together the PowerPoint, some of the plants I already had, and I knew a lot of them, but this one I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Anyway, it's on the caution list. It's not listed on Flipsy list, but when Uf Ifas adds plants to their list, they don't do it randomly. They do a lot of scientific study before they put a plant on a list, because you got to realize they're affecting a lot of people, a lot of businesses, people that sell these, people that sell seeds. So they're very, very careful, and they have a very scientific method of researching these plants, and they have a whole list that they go through, and they a lot of categories in that list, and they check them off and give them all these numbers and research it thoroughly, usually for a couple of years, and then they reassess them every few years. And it may never get beyond the caution list, but it could be too. So it's something to be aware of if you're planting it. Just be aware that it could be a problem. Earliest record is 1948. And then this princess flower, glory bush. This is one that, it's been added in the last several years. I don't know exactly when, but I do remember maybe 10 years ago planting it. And then within the last few years, found out it was on the list. There's more than one kind of Tibouchina. So be aware of which one you're planting, because I don't think the other one's on the list yet. But the easiest way to tell, and I couldn't get a good picture of the leaves separate, but this is kind of point, it goes to a point at both ends, and it has these ridges or lines on the leaves. The other one is not nearly as ridged as this one is. So it's a high invasion risk, and it's from South America, and the earliest record wasn't listed, but it can be a problem, so be aware of that. Coconut palm, another one that people don't want to hear that it's on the list. It's actually already considered invasive in South Florida. It's on the caution list in Central Florida, not a problem species in North Florida, probably because it would freeze and it's never going to become a problem there. Category 2 on Flipsy is from tropical Asia, Australasia, the Pacific. Earliest record 1916. Sad to see it added to the list, but I've seen people that live near water have these, and nobody uses that many coconuts. I've seen people with piles of them underneath their trees. If they happen to be really close to the water, it falls into the water, it floats away, then it's going to other islands, other areas, and you can see why it can be such a problem. Not as bad as some plants, because you know you maybe only have 100 seeds at a time. It's not like thousands of seeds that some plants produce, but each one of those can make a tree, land on a shore somewhere, make a tree, start another plant. And that's why it's already been added to the invasive list in South Florida, because they have overabundance of them there, and could become a problem here. It can freeze in Central Florida, so you don't see it as much of a problem, but just be aware of it. Javanese, glory bower, clerodendron. There's several clerodendrons that are either on the list or probably should be added to the list. Some of them spread like crazy. We had one type here, which is not on the list yet, that it spread maybe 50 feet in each direction. We pulled hundreds of plants out where it was, not this one, but another very closely related one. In South and Central Florida, it's on the caution list. In North Florida, not a problem species, probably because it freezes in North Florida. Flipsy category 2 is from tropical Asia. The earliest record is 1958. Beautiful, beautiful plant. Has really big heart-shaped leaves, probably, like that big. Just one that we need to be aware of. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit into, probably went a little fast through those. So we may get done a little bit early, but that gives us more times for questions. When we talk about control plants, sometimes we mention chemicals. Usually we try to control them in a different way first. That's more sustainable, using a resource so that the resource is not depleted or permanently damaged. So when you're spraying, you need to be super, super careful. But the most sustainable way of controlling plants is IPM, integrated pest management. You want to know what it is first, and this is especially important in insects, because a lot of people end up spraying something just because it's an insect on their plant. It's actually one that's eating other insects. But with plants, there's a lot of plants that look very, very similar to each other. And it's just like me buying that plant that was invasive. Identification and scouting, those are really, really important. Know what you're planting before you plant. I'm so embarrassed that I did that. And I wouldn't normally tell on myself like that, but oh, Charlie horse. Okay. It's just important to be aware of those things, looking plants up, seeing a plant at it and saying, oh, this is so cute, let's buy it. It's not. And I know better, and I still did it. So it's so easy to happen. So I'm only telling you, and telling on myself, because people think I know and I wouldn't ever do that. It can happen. It can happen easy. So identification and scouting on your plants in your yard, keeping track of what's starting to grow. I am probably not every week, but at least once a month, pulling Brazilian pepper seedlings out of my yard and pulling carrotwood seedlings out of my yard. There's several other plant seedlings, some invasive, some maybe aren't invasive yet, but they should be. Pulling seedlings out of my yard because I live in an area where there's undeveloped lots and there's a lot of carrotwood, a lot of Brazilian pepper. I have to watch. I had one of the Japanese climbing ferns growing in my yard. I have to really watch because spores are going to blow in and things like that. So identification and scouting, and then preventing. Sometimes you can easily pull them out while they're little. If they don't get a chance to grow. I've grown plants before and said, well, I'm going to let it grow until I find out what it is. And then I'm like, oh, I need to pull that out. And sometimes I still can. Sometimes it's too hard to pull out. Then you might have to cut it and paint the stem with a herbicide. But preventing it is always the first. So pulling those seedlings out before they get a chance to grow. And then cultural practices, biological methods, physical methods. And then at the very bottom of that, IPM, Principles of Integrated Pest Management, is chemical methods if you have to resort to that. And even then, you want to use the least damaging, the one that'll do the job without being the most severe or the strongest chemical. Sometimes you can control, especially with, again, insects, because this is mainly what we've used. Insects you can sometimes spray with soapy water and kill an insect. Now, most weeds you're not going to be able to kill with soapy water, but there are herbicides that aren't as strong as other ones, and it might kill something. And then other times you have to resort to stronger chemicals. So biological retards the growth. It doesn't usually kill it. There are ones, this picture here is the air potato beetle, which does not kill the air potato, but it retards the growth, it slows it down. It takes them years and years, sometimes 10 years or more, to develop a new biological control, because they have to make sure that it's safe for the environment to release it, and then they have to get permission to release it. And then it takes a while to grow the insects to release. So it takes a while, but so some successful examples of that are the air potato beetle. This one down here is the tropical soda apple beetle. There's one for Melaleuca that they've released in the last few years, a psyllid and a weevil. So just those are some treatment options. Not every plant has one developed yet. And then chemical options, considerations, you make sure you're wearing the proper PPE, proper protective equipment. I know these things. Why is my mind doing this to me? Okay. Safety is of the utmost importance. The label is the law. You'll hear us say that in every presentation we make has anything to do with treating insects or herbicides or anything. Like, you have to make sure you follow the label, and that's wearing the proper PPE, personal protection equipment. Non-target, you want to make sure you're not spraying anything that you don't want. You don't want people, plants, other plants or animals to be damaged or hurt or get in the spray. So you got to be very, very careful with that. Make sure the specificity to the plant, the time, the amount of area, the type of application, the temperature, the time of day, the time of year, a lot of times, all those things you need to pay a special importance to. And I think this is what you said you were taking over, Katherine.
Yes, sure. I will take over here. So who decides on plant invasive status in Florida? Well, once again, remember there are sort of two camps that we can consider. We can consider more of a legal definition where there's actually laws about or against certain plants, and that's going to be FDACS, which is the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And then also the Florida Wildlife and Conservation Commission, which we commonly refer to as the FWC. They make decisions about invasive wildlife. So there are legal lists and legal definitions, and those are the plants and animals that have some sort of statutory definition or regulations that are managed by these different organizations. So what we're mostly talking about today is the University of Florida IFAS Assessment and the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, or FLEPC. These are more educational organizations that are providing this science-based data and lists to help us educate people about what is invasive, but mostly what Wilma's talked about today are things that are high invasion risk or caution plants. So they're more our watch list plants. So just remember there's a legal section, and then what we're mostly providing is educational information that is science-based to help us make better choices in our community. And we've had a lot of questions about that today. Someone just mentioned to me privately in the chat that on our gardening solutions page for IFAS, Staghorn Fern is on there, and there isn't any indication that people shouldn't be not really planting it, but hanging it maybe is the best word, or growing it, we'll say growing it. And yes, sometimes when things are only on the caution list for the Uf Ifas assessment, that information hasn't been spread across all divisions yet. Because it is just cautionary, because we see a potential for invasion. But as responsible gardeners and homeowners, we can make responsible choices about maybe not even going there and planting something else that's native to our ecosystem. Next. So I also put the link for the Uf Ifas assessment in just one or two back in the chat. And we usually send you out a resource list with lots of different links and information as well after we get done with the presentation. So you will have that link. But that's a great place to go to look up some of these plants that we're talking about. It's research-based, as Wilma mentioned. It has separate lists based on the area of the state. So it'll tell you its category for South Florida, Central Florida, and North Florida, because of course there's a lot of variability in our state. It will list whether or not something is state or federally regulated, which would be our state or federal noxious weed list. It will actually say prohibited under the plant on the Uf Ifas assessment if it is actually regulated in our state. And some of the other categories include invasive, invasive no uses, high invasion risk, which is a lot of the ones Wilma talked about today, meaning it hasn't quite been categorized as invasive yet, but there's a lot of concern that it could be, low invasion risk, and then caution is the category before not a problem species. So caution's just like the yellow light. It's not quite a green light plant, but it's not a red light plant either. It's a plant that we need to consider and be cautious of, and Uf Ifas will continue to watch it and reassess it. They are continually, as Wilma mentioned, evaluating plants and updating the Uf Ifas assessment as needed. Next. So here are the different zones for Uf Ifas assessments. So you can see Sarasota, where we're giving the presentation from, is in the central zone, but right up against the south zone. So in Sarasota, we probably ought to really pay attention to what the Uf Ifas assessment says for the south area as well, especially as climate change occurs and we have more of, you know, perhaps more elevated temperatures, that things that are a problem in the south zone could easily become a problem in the central zone in Sarasota County especially. Next. So here's that metaphor of the red light, yellow light, green light. So I consider the categories of the Uf Ifas assessment that are prohibited, invasive, invasive no uses, and high invasion risk to be in that red light category. These are the ones that we really ought to try to veer away from planting. Of course, if they're prohibited, you can't plant them. And these are reassessed every 10 years, and that's about 26 of the plants on the assessment list. Now realize not all 4,900 identified plants in Florida are on the assessment list. We don't have that many people to be able to assess all of those plants yet, but there is a large number of them, and about a quarter of them are considered in this like red light category. And then we put caution, moderate risk, more yellow light. So those are some of the other ones Wilma talked about today, not showing quite as much of a problem, but certainly showing a potential to be a problem. And then the green light ones are the not a problem species. And these also are reassessed every 10 years. And that's the majority of the plants on the Ifas assessment. So don't think that just because a plant is listed on the Uf Ifas assessment, it means you shouldn't use it. No, you have to look at what category it's in, because they're looking at all different plants and assessing whether or not they're invasive or going to be a risk for invasion. And if they don't think they are, then they list them as not a problem species. And those are great ones for you to pick. All right, next. So this is what the Uf Ifas assessment looks like. So if you click on that link that I put in the chat box, or that we'll send you later on, you're gonna land on this page here, and you can type right into the search bar either the scientific name or the common name of a species. Thank you, Wilma. I'm moving my cursor, not realizing that my cursor. And then you also can just search alphabetically. So this picture on the right-hand side, this is just an alphabetical list that includes every plant they've assessed, recognizing once again that some of these, if you click on them, may not be a problem plant, and then they're fine to use. So we're going to show you an example of one we looked up on the next slide. So this is the oyster plant, or Wilma, say the scientific name for me.
It's a Tradescantia.
Thank you. Oh, there, I couldn't find it on there. Tradescantia spathaceae, I think. So this oyster plant, you can see in the south on the lower bottom right there, is considered invasive no uses in the south. So you should not have this. If you live in that southern area of Florida, you should not have this in your yard. You should not be planting it outside, and you should try to remove it if you do have it. Whereas in the central and northern regions of Florida, it's not even considered like a risky species. It's considered not a problem species. So once again, not only look up your plants, but look at the category and the region, so you know if it's a problem where you're wanting to plant it or not. Next.
I just want to point out one thing here, where it says filter results. You can click on that. You have to click low, because if you click right on it, it goes to this other page. But If you click low on this, then you can choose by your zone. You can choose by
category.
Categories like high invasion risk, caution, invasive, prohibited. You can choose whichever category you want, and then you can get a separate list. And then after that, you click on apply results or apply filters. And then you get this separate list of just the plants that you want. So you don't have to look through every single plant. I find that really useful. And then you can actually export it to an Excel file. And then you get everything in one line. So where it's from, what year it was introduced, or the first known record, the Latin name, the common name, other synonyms if there are any, how it was assessed, whether it was by the predictive tool or the actual assessment. So you get all that information if you click on those filtering the results. Is really, really handy. Took me a long time to use that.
And Jamie mentioned in the chat box that they've noticed that some invasives in South Florida that are not invasive in Central, and maybe because here in Central Florida, we're more parallel to, for instance, Texas. And yes, a lot of times things that are invasive in South Florida are not invasive or in Central and North because of our climatology, because it's colder here, and they either can't grow or they can't grow to an invasive status. They may still be able to grow here, but they can't grow as well. So a lot of times it is because we're just a little bit further north in Central and Northern Florida. So here are some places to find Florida information. Remember, we're going to send you all these links. But the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants has the invasive plant laws and also a lot of aquatic plants, obviously by its name. So if you're more interested in what's in your stormwater pond or in the lake or stream near you, that would be the place to look for some of our aquatic invasive plants. The Florida State listed noxious weeds, we've given you or will give you a link to that if you want to see the noxious weed list. And then the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council that we've been talking about, I think we have a picture of that on the next slide, Wilma. We'll send you the link for Flepsy, but this is what that looks like. And I know you can't read it right now because it's very tiny and blurry, but just to give you an idea of what Flepsy does, and Flepsy is a multi-agency organization that compiles these lists every 2 years. And then they divide the list into category ones, and category ones are the worst ones. They're invasives that are altering native plant communities by displacing native species, changing community structures or ecological functions, or hybridizing with natives. Whereas category 2, they are still considered invasive by Flepsy, but they're just a little less worse. So the definition for that is invasives that have increased in abundance or frequency, but have not yet altered Florida plant communities to the extent shown by category 1 species, although they certainly could become category 1 species if ecological damage is demonstrated. So this is a slightly different list. It has different parameters. I like to look at them both as someone affiliated with University of Florida. We always look at Uf Ifas Assessment first, and there's a lot more information on the assessment list in my opinion. But this one is also important to cross-reference, and you can see it's also zoned by North, Central, and South. So it will tell you, for instance, Rosary P, which is the first one listed under category 1s, that is an issue more in Central and South Florida. Next. Your local SISMAs are also a great place for resources and education, and sometimes they even do work days and things like that. So you'll have this link as well, floridainvasives.org, which takes you to information and this map where you can click on your region to find your local SISMA. SISMA stands for Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas. And once again, these are multi-agency collaborative attempts to educate people about the issue with invasive species. Our regional one is the Suncoast SISMA, which I am a co-chair of. And when we get back to pre-COVID sort of whatever normalcy will be now. We hopefully will be having more work days, but currently we have some identification videos, and eventually our videos of these webinars will be on our Suncoast SYSMA YouTube channel. Next. So if you want to find some of these distribution maps, Wilma showed you one distribution map that indicated what counties plants have been vouchered in. And vouchered just simply means somebody has identified the plant scientifically and sent it to one of our universities that house herbariums, and like a university botanist or professor has said, yes, that is definitely the plant. Once they say that, then we consider it vouchered in the area where it was found. And that those are the maps where you can start learning whether or not some of these species have actually definitely been identified in your county. You can find those in a variety of places, but edmaps.org is a great resource for invasive species information, both plants and animals. And they also have an associated not only website, but phone number and app for your cell phone that allows you to report when you do see invasive species. This is really helpful for invasive animal species, but also useful for plants as well. Next. And really, the solution all starts with each of us. This is a huge issue. It's an issue that does not know borders. So it's not just one agency's problem. It's really an ecosystem-wide problem that all of us can do our little part to make a solution for. And so one of the best things you can do is educate yourself so that you understand the issue and you can start identifying some of the plants and making better choices about what you personally choose to do when you go shopping for plants or when you plant things in your yard. So there's books available out there. This one in the lower left-hand corner, the non-native plant book, that is available for free download. And it is a fabulous book. It's the one that I probably refer the most to. So that is really great. You can order it from the Uf Ifas Extension bookstore, but you can download it for free, and we'll send you the link to be able to do that. That other one in the middle, that's like a laminated fold-out guide, which is also very useful for identifying plants if you're looking around more in natural areas, not so much your backyard plants. And then our EDIS, which is that top picture, that's our electronic delivery information system for University of Florida. And they have a whole topic page on invasive species. So if you just Google EDIS and invasive species, you'll get to this topic page and be able to look through all of the research that's been published on invasive species through University of Florida. Next. This is a great book, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Guide to Plant Selection and Landscape Design. This is also available for free download, so we will send you the link for that. But at many of our Florida Extension offices, you may be able to get a copy, a hard copy for free. At our office in Sarasota, we have a pile of them at our front desk. So you just walk into our lobby and you can pick one up. And it tells you many plants that are native or considered Florida friendly and hopefully not going to be a problem in your yard that you can plant. And what's really cool about this book is it also has little icons if it's a plant that's good for butterflies or birds and provides habitat for our native wildlife. So right here on this slide, here are some things that you can do. Remove plants that you identify as invasive in your yard and replant with natives or Florida friendly plants out of this guide. Shop at native plant nurseries because some of those big box stores are selling many of the plants that we talk about today, whereas the native plant nurseries are going to be much more educated and hopefully only have Florida native plants. You can join your local native plant society. They often do a lot of programs that can help you learn more about the native plants that are going to grow well in your area. You can always reach out to us or your local extension office or Master Gardener Plant Clinic if you have questions or need help. And of course, decreasing chemical use is always helpful to our native plants and wildlife as well. Next. We do really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. and learn more about this. We are happy to be available to answer any questions for you. Oh,